If your podcast is the only thing that you're building, your growth is always going to feel fragile. Your podcast isn't just the product anymore. It's the front door to everything else that you do. Let's get into today's conversation. Hello. Welcome back to this week's episode of As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm Simona Costantini, host of the show, and I'm really excited to have you here today for this conversation. I know we've been focusing a lot on the growth side of podcasting in the last few episodes, and I have a little bit more content about this for you coming up as well. But the reason why I want to focus in on this so much is because this is what we hear in the agency every single day. I want to grow my reach. I want to grow my podcast. I want to grow my impact. I want to grow my audience. I want to grow my following. I want to grow my subscribers. I want to grow my bank account. Grow, which is fantastic. We all want growth. But the thing is, how you're growing and how you're building your podcast and how you're building your growth is a little bit different today than it was all those years ago. So if you've been around here a while and you've been listening to this content for a while, thank you so much. Welcome back. If you want to go even further in my community, I have the Podcast Success Vault, which is a membership for podcasters, creators, small business owners, and we meet on a weekly basis 3 times a month for 60 minutes, and it's kind of mastermind style, which is super fun. And we go into all things podcast launch, podcast growth, podcast monetization, strategy, and everything that you would need in a podcasting partner if you don't want to pay the hefty price tag to do so. Check the link out for that. It is in the episode notes below. But let's get into this topic today. I want to talk about the building and the growth that is always going to feel fragile if your podcast is the only thing that you are building or focusing on. A lot of the times when creators come to me, small businesses come to me, entrepreneurs come to me, they'll say they want to start a podcast, or they have a podcast and it's not really doing anything for them. It's not working for them. They don't know how to make it make sense in their overall strategy and their overall plan. But I want to introduce you to this concept. And you know me, I like to put things in 3 parts, but let's start with this first part here. If you think of your podcast is now the front door of the content that you are creating. The first idea here is that your show is what is going to be introducing your thinking. Every time you put an episode out there, that episode is shaping a belief that you have. We go on to our podcast to share our thoughts, to share what we've learned, to share anything related to our businesses, our lives, if it's an entertainment podcast, and so on. So the episodes that you're creating ultimately are what shape belief. If we think about how your show introduces your thinking, though, yes, the episodes shape the belief, but also your authority starts to build and compound over time. What you do at episode 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is not the same thing that you may do at episode 40, 50, 60, episode 100, 120, 130, 140, right? Your authority becomes more clear. Your authority becomes more present. And this is something that just happens over time. It's not something that you can kind of come out the gate swinging, because even those huge, massive podcasters all face some kind of criticism, some kind of like, is this episode actually going to be really good? Or is this show actually going to be really good? And you have to earn the audience's trust, right? Trust is the thing that is going to precede the conversion. So you need to earn your audience's trust, right? As you're creating your content, as you're creating your episodes, as you're sharing every single week, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever the frequency is of your podcast, that trust will precede the conversion on your show. So this is a really important way to kind of think about in this sort of framework, that the show introduces your overall thinking, and how you use it is really important, because ultimately episodes are the thing that builds belief. They don't necessarily sell right off the bat. A lot of creators want to use their podcast to make money, to sell into a program, affiliates, bring them into the newsletter, like whatever it is that you're trying to do with your podcast, whatever the monetization strategy is behind the scenes, behind the lens. A lot of the times, if you go in hard and you start selling too early, it creates this friction, right? What we want to do here is education, because education is what builds safety with the audience. We want the audience to come back every single week. We want them to purchase whatever thing is that you are selling. But really, that builds over time, because people need to get to know you. They need to get to like you. They need to get to trust you and trust your message and what you are sharing, and know that you become a credible authority in the space that they are wanting to gain information from. Listeners will always buy after they trust, not before. So what can you do in your content, in your episodes, to introduce your thinking, what we just talked about, but also continue to build that belief and not just come out the gate swinging with selling and all of that stuff. It's important to sell if that is the intention of your show. If it's not, then you don't need to worry about it. But you also still want to build that community. You want to build your audience and you want to build the relationship with the people who are listening to your podcast. I get asked this all the time, especially when it comes to building audiences. How do I build my audience? Where are they? How do I find them? The real value happens after the listen. And what I mean by this is that your show, your podcast, your YouTube channel, whatever you're creating, opens the relationship with the person who is listening, who is consuming the content on the other end. And the ecosystem that you create around your show is the thing that is going to deepen it. And so we want to open the door to that conversation. We want to bring people in. We want them to learn about us, about our content, about what we're creating. And then we want them to trust us, trust our message, trust what we're sharing so that we can build that relationship even more and create an ecosystem around it to strengthen it and to deepen it. So let's talk now about the growth that happens off platform, okay? The first thing I want to talk about is email lists and communities. They matter. They really, really, really do. At the end of the day, everything that you put out onto any platform is an algorithm, right? You are constantly fighting an algorithm, whether it's your post on LinkedIn, a video on TikTok, some reels on Instagram, a post on Threads. They're all great platforms and they all have a strategy and they all serve a purpose, right? You need to understand how these platforms work for you. But owning your audience is so important. This is where email lists and communities come in. And the reason why is because the ownership of your audience beats the algorithm every single time. When you have an email list of people that you can email about your new podcast episode, or if you have a community that you're building, a membership that you are building, where you're continuing to build and strengthen that relationship every single week or every single month or whatever the structure is of the platform, you are building a community that matters. And this is really, really, really important because those direct connections compound over time. And we want to strengthen relationships. We want people to feel part of our ecosystem. At the end of the day, platforms will continue to change. They will always change. This is not new, right? This is something we see all the time. Someone makes an update, a platform crashes, something goes down, people freak out, all of the things, right? Platforms will change over time, but the relationship that people have with you, with your show, with your message, with your voice will not, right? The goal is that it'll continue to strengthen, that it'll continue to grow, that it'll continue to deepen. And so when you think about owning the platform and owning your community, this is one really important way to continue to grow, right? How do you grow outside of the podcast feed? I want you to think about it. The next thing that I want to talk about is how much better a podcast converts with next steps. When you have clear call to actions, this is something that increases momentum. People want guidance. Listeners want guidance. They want to know what to do next. They need something to do with you, a next step. The challenge is a lot of the times people will put 17 call to actions in their podcast episode, and it becomes so messy. The listener does not know what to do next with you. Do you want them to download a guide? Do you want them to join your community? Do you want them to listen to another episode? Do you want them to follow and rate, review, subscribe? Do you want them to share an episode with somebody else? When you give them too many options, it becomes very overwhelming in terms of how many steps the person has to take with you next. Having clear call to actions is something that is going to help guide your listener to where you want them to go with you next. If you listen to my podcast, at the beginning of every single episode, I mention my podcast Successful community. That is where I want to grow. That is where I want to bring more people in together, right? And so I just challenge you to take a look at your call to actions. What are you asking people to do? How many call to actions do you have in your episodes? Are there a lot? Are there too many? What does it look like? And then how does that help people convert better with next steps? So then if we take this concept even further and we take it a step further, people want that place to go. They don't want to just consume episodes. Some people do. Some people just want to consume content and they want to be done with it. But there's a lot of people out there that actually want to go deeper with you. They actually want to belong to a community. They want to consume more of your content in a different way. And so this is how we start to build out community. This is how we bring people into our community. And so when you can think about where you want people to go, how you want them to take a next step with you, think of your call to actions, think about where you want them to go, think about a community that you could be building, and how does the show overall work in your entire ecosystem? How are people integrating more into your journey through the podcast? That is a really intentional way to grow. And the last part of this episode that I want to share with you today, especially when it comes to the growth side of things, is the idea that strategy will beat volume every single time. I've done so many different strategy reviews, discovery calls, and all of the things in the last year, and specifically in the last couple of weeks. And some of these creators have a bi-weekly podcast. Some of them have a monthly podcast. Some of them have a weekly podcast. It totally depends on what their strategy is, what fits in their life, and what works for them. I am always a huge fan of creating the amount of episodes that you can sustainably do over time. So if your podcast starts as a weekly podcast and becomes a bi-weekly podcast, maybe it turns into a monthly podcast. I am just of the mindset of consistency. You need to be consistent because your audience needs to know what to expect from you. If you think of even having fewer episodes, if the clarity and the intent behind the episode is more strategic, it is more clear, people can understand it, that kind of content will always win. When you're constantly putting out noise, when you're constantly putting out episodes just to put something out, that content doesn't convert, okay? Being precise does, and knowing what you are talking about and who you are communicating with does. So think of your intent and how it can beat the output that you're putting out. Intent over output. And then if we're using the podcast for growth in a more significant way, every episode that you put out should serve your larger ecosystem overall. The content that you create should support your offers. Your offers should support your listeners. And that is how everything starts to connect together. Now, of course, this is more of, a business style podcast, a podcaster who's using their show for business, right? If you're an entertainment style podcast, you may have a monetization component to it in the form of a community. And the idea is still the same. Because at the end of the day, if you want to grow the podcast and you want to make money from the podcast, you got to look at it as a business. Yes, it's something you do for fun, but also it is a business at the end of the day. And I don't say that to take the fun out of podcasting, but where people get frustrated and where people get stuck is that they're putting out this great content and it's not reaching the people that they want it to reach. And we want it to reach those people. So just make sure that whatever you are doing, whatever you're creating, supports the overall ecosystem. And then my last point here is that it supports your overall brand. And we don't want this to be the other way around. Having a strategy behind your podcast, being prepared with what episodes are going to go out and when, brings this sense of clarity and this sense of calm. And the powerful part here is that the calm that you are creating by having the systems and the processes is what is going to sustain your overall growth. You know exactly what is going out and when, how it fits into your blog, your newsletter, your social media, your marketing, your referrals, whatever it is that you have. And that is the thing that sustains growth over time. So when we look at this conversation today and how to grow a podcast in 2026 and realizing that the podcast is not just a product, it is part of the larger ecosystem of what you are creating, these points here are really important to consider, and they're really helpful when you actually take them and put them into practice. So that is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Again, if you want to take this a step further, the link for my membership community is in the episode notes below. Feel free to check that out. I would love to have you in there. And of course, if you want to say hi, please do. I'm always here. I love hearing from you. Any comments, questions, drop them in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or just send them my way. Thank you again so much for being here, and I will see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now.